Ukraine wants peace. Volodymyr Zelensky appealed to Putin. And in Russia, then mentioned Sweden.
Самое главное, что Швеция навсегда утратила статус великой европейской державы.
How were the negotiations in Turkey and what to expect next? I'm Albina Peterniak. We will analyze the news of Ukraine and the world together.
President Zelensky, Sky News, do you have a message for Vladimir Putin?
I think this is very clear.
This is how the preparations for the talks in Istanbul were conducted. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky arrived in Turkey on May 15 to hold direct talks with Putin. Other representatives of Ukraine also arrived in Turkey. There were high-ranking officials and diplomats of various levels. Ukraine was ready to present its delegation on the highest level. The United States of America was also ready. On the eve of the day of the talks, world media wrote that Trump could come to the meeting between Russia and Ukraine. However, such a scenario is possible only if Putin also comes to Turkey. But Putin didn't appear. Instead, Putin sent a delegation that didn't have enough authority to make important decisions. In the end, the Russian delegation was perceived as a caricature, since the only thing these Russian representatives were capable of was making provocative statements. They were working out the Kremlin's methodological instructions. On the May 16, the meeting between representatives of Ukraine and Russia took place behind closed doors. The details of the negotiations were not disclosed, but Reuters wrote about unrealistic demands from Russia. In particular, Russia demanded that Ukraine withdraw troops from its own regions, and all this in order to start a ceasefire. Among the agreements that were reached between Ukraine and Russia is an agreement on the exchange of prisoners of war in the amount of 1,000 for 1,000. This is now considered a serious achievement of this negotiation. This is how the head of the Russian delegation, Medinsky, commented on the negotiations.
Colleagues, direct talks with the Ukrainian side, organized at the initiative of the President of Russia, have just ended. In general, we are satisfied with the results and are ready to continue contact. What did you agree on? First, in the coming days, there will be a large-scale exchange of prisoners of 1,000 for 1,000 people. Second, the Ukrainian side requested direct negotiations between the heads of state. We have taken this request into account. And third, we agreed that each side would present its vision of a possible future ceasefire. He will spell it out in detail. After this vision is presented, we believe it would be expedient to continue our talks. Thank you.
While the composition of Russian delegation was more than modest, it was difficult to count the propaganda media from Russia. Every represented media sent at least 10 journalists from their organization. That is why when the Ukrainian Defense Minister Rustem Umerov appeared before the press, the Russians simply disrupted the press conference. Here is what Ukrainian journalists managed to hear from the Ukrainian side after the meeting.
We discussed the issue of a ceasefire, discussed the issue of exchanges. The result is an exchange of 1,000 faces, thousands for 1,000. Therefore, this is our result of today's meeting.
Is it in the near future? When can this happen?
Yes, in the near future. We already know the date, but we won't say it yet.
As for the ceasefire, has it been discussed? How many days?
All modalities were discussed. Now our colleagues will exchange documents and will inform you later.
Were the contacts of Presidents Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky discussed?
We discussed. We are also working on this issue.
This is what Rustem Umerov was talking about. Volodymyr Zelensky is really ready to meet Putin for direct negotiations. However, we understand that this requires appropriate conditions. The head of the state can meet in several cases. In particular, if both sides want to urgently discuss the issue of ending the war, and the second option, in the case when the delegations were previously agreed on all the points and all that remains is to sign a peace agreement. We understand that the Russian dictator doesn't want to stop the fighting now and is demonstrating this in every possible way. He is demonstrating in every possible way that he doesn't need peace, and all he wants is to simply manipulate the world order and the leaders of democratic countries. That is why British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, French President Emmanuel Macron, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, and newly elected German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, and of course Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called Trump. The Ukrainian president wrote about this in his telegram.
I spoke with US President Donald Trump, together with President Macron, Federal Chancellor Merz, Prime Ministers Starmer and Tusk. We discussed the meeting in Istanbul. Ukraine is ready to take the fastest possible steps for the sake of real peace, and it is important that the world holds strong positions. Our position: if the Russians refuse a complete and unconditional ceasefire and killings, then there must be strong sanctions. Pressure on Russia must be maintained until Russia is ready to end the war. Thank you to everyone in the world who is helping.
Volodymyr Zelensky spoke at the plenary summit of the European political community. He confirmed that Ukraine was ready for serious peace talks. The Ukrainian leader was ready to personally talk to Putin if he were not afraid, and came to the meeting, which he himself initiated.
Ukraine needs peace. Peace in Europe depends on whether Ukraine will get it. All of you know that this week we had a real chance to take important steps toward ending this war, if only Putin had not been afraid to come to Turkey. I was in Ankara yesterday, and thanks for participation and hosting us, President Erdogan. And I was ready for a direct meeting with Putin, whether in Ankara or in Istanbul, and not just for a meeting, but to resolve all the important issues to my mind. But he didn't agree to anything, Putin. And you can also see that the Russian delegation that came to Istanbul is of a very low level. None of them are people who actually make decisions in Russia. Still, I sent our team to Istanbul, led by Ukraine's Minister of Defense, at least to see if those Russians can actually decide anything. Our number one priority is a full, unconditional and honest ceasefire. This must happen immediately to stop the killing and create a solid basis for diplomacy, first of all. And if the Russian representatives in Istanbul today cannot even agree to that, to ceasefire, to this clearly necessary first step, then it will be 100% clear that Putin continues to undermine diplomacy.
Volodymyr Zelensky noted that the Ukrainian side was a mandate to make decisions, while Russia sent to the meeting in Turkey all those who came to the negotiations in 2022, and this indicates that the enemy continues to hold the same position.
The Ukrainian delegation has a mandate to make decisions. As we saw yesterday, Russia sent almost the same people it sent in 2022. This shows that Russia has not changed its basic approach. They make many statements, many threats, but solve nothing. They are doing everything they can to turn this Istanbul meeting into a staged, empty process, just like the ones in 2022. It's not us or Western leaders who are disrupting the negotiation that the Russians have been claiming for years. It's Russians who send empty heads to the talks. And that's what destroys the meaning of diplomacy. So if it turns out that the Russian delegation really is just theatrical and can't deliver any results today, the world must respond. There needs to be a strong reaction including sanctions against Russia's energy sector and banks. Pressure must continue to rise until real progress is made.
Putin made a very serious mistake when he sent a low-level delegation to Istanbul for talks with Ukraine. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte said this. He noted that Putin should have taken the issue of peace more seriously. He said this after arriving at the European Political Community Summit.
I think Putin made a mistake by sending a low-level delegation to Istanbul for talks with Ukraine. The ball is clearly in his court. Now it is in his court. He must cooperate. He must take the desire for peace seriously. Ukraine sent a delegation that is really ready to negotiate a ceasefire. I am very pleased with the role played by the United States. This is really important. President Trump has brought the situation out of the deadlock, clearly taking the initiative into his own hands. All this is extremely useful.
Donald Trump said he would talk to Putin on the phone and maybe meet with the Russian dictator. Trump outlined what would he done once the meeting was agreed upon. Trump made the announcement aboard Air Force One as he departed Abu Dhabi. He said, "We have to meet. We will meet with him. We will resolve this issue, or maybe not, but at least we will find out. And if we don't decide, it will be very interesting," the American president said in a veiled tone.
Mr. President, are you disappointed in the level of the delegation that the Russians sent to Turkey?
I don't know anything about it. I'm not disappointed in anything. Who are you from?
BBC News.
I'm not disappointed. Why would I be disappointed? We just took in $4 trillion, and he says, "Are you disappointed about a delegation?" I know nothing about a delegation. I haven't even checked. Nothing's going to happen until Putin and I get together, okay? And obviously he wasn't going to go. He was going to go, but he thought I was going to go. He wasn't going if I wasn't there. And I don't believe anything's going to happen, whether you like it or not, until he and I get together. But we're going to have to get it solved because too many people are dying. Thank you. You're going to land right now. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Meanwhile, Putin himself didn't fly to Tokyo, where Trump was really ready to meet with him. Putin continues to sit in the Kremlin bunker and set out his conditions. These demands are voiced by Kremlin spokesman Peskov. And what is interesting is that these days Putin is really nowhere to be seen. No reports of meetings of the Russian dictator. Zarubin is currently simply sitting without work because Putin is hiding somewhere in his bunker waiting for the end of the negotiations, to which he didn't have courage to come.
The summit must be prepared and productive. At the top, expert negotiations, consultations, and long-term intense preparation are preceded. Especially if we are talking about a summit meeting with the United States. This is how we see the situation. At the same time, it is undoubtedly necessary, both in terms of bilateral Russian-American relations and in terms of discussing serious high-level conversations on international affairs and regional issues, including the crisis over Ukraine.
On the eve of the meeting with the Russian, Ukraine held a meeting with its partners, in particular with representatives from the United States, to agree on position in the negotiations. Among the main issues, of course, is a ceasefire and an exchange of prisoners of war. This was started by the spokesman of the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry, Georgy Tichy. The Ukrainian spokesman added that given the composition of the delegation that Russia has now sent to the negotiations, it is not yet clear what decision these representatives of the aggressor country have the authority to make.
At the meeting, positions were coordinated before the meeting of the delegations of Ukraine and Russia, which will take place later today in Istanbul. It was an important morning meeting to coordinate these positions. Now we are next to the palace, where trilateral negotiations are taking place at the level of foreign ministers. U.S. Secretary of State Rubio, Special Representative Kellogg, from the Ukrainian side, the same delegation, Minister Andriy Sabiha, Head of the President's Office Andriy Yermak, Defense Minister Rustem Umerov and Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan, and Turkish Intelligence Chief Ibrahim Kalin are also present. Now there is such a trilateral format at the high level of ministers in order for the bearers of the position to exchange views. Later today, we expect a meeting between the delegation of Ukraine and Russia to take place. Yesterday, President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky decided to send a Ukrainian delegation, even though representatives of Russia, frankly, of a low level arrived. Their mandate is not fully understood what decisions they can make. The Ukrainian delegation will understand at this meeting today, see what decisions Russian representatives can make. For the Ukrainian delegation, priority number one on the agenda is a full, unconditional long-term ceasefire. This will be an indicator of the Russians' readiness for constructive work. Thanks.
Here is what Georgy Tichy said about the meeting. Although we do not know the details of the meeting, a certain picture can be drawn based on the expectations and position that Ukraine and our partners had. On the eve of the meeting with the Russians, Defense Minister Rustem Umerov revealed the details of Ukraine's work with partners and once again clearly emphasized Ukraine's position regarding these negotiations. In Istanbul, together with the head of the office of the President of Ukraine, Andriy Yermak, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Andriy Sabiha, a meeting was held with the special representative of the President of the United States of America, Kit Kellogg, the National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister of Great Britain, Jonathan Powell, the Advisor to the Chancellor of Germany on Foreign Policy and Security, Gunther Sauter, and the diplomatic advisor to the President of France, Emmanuel Bon. We coordinated our position with our colleagues ahead of today's meeting with the Russian delegation in Istanbul. The Ukrainian side confirmed its commitment to peace efforts, emphasizing the constructive steps taken in recent weeks and months. Umerov wrote about this in his telegram.
We are ready for a complete and unconditional ceasefire, as previously noted during meetings in Jeddah and Riyadh with our American partners. Ukraine is ready for direct negotiations at the highest level. Today we arrived in Istanbul to find real ways to a sustainable and just peace. Peace is possible only if Russia shows readiness for concrete actions, including a complete ceasefire for at least 30 days and the implementation of humanitarian steps, such as the return of forcibly deported Ukrainian children and exchanges of prisoners of war on an all-for-all basis. We are grateful to our partners, the United States, France, the United Kingdom and Germany, for their support in advancing the peace process. We are also grateful to Turkey for its assistance in organizing today's meeting and for creating a platform for negotiations, as well as for its active participation in achieving a just peace for Ukraine.
Speaking about the details of the agreements in Istanbul, the head of the Russian delegation gave an interview to the Russian propagandist Popov. Not much has been said about the negotiations in Istanbul, but he talked at length about when Russia became the so-called great, namely when Peter the Great fought with the Swedes in the 18th century.
The Northern War with Sweden, after which Sweden forever lost the status of a great power and the Russian Empire became a great power. The Northern War with Sweden lasted 21 years. 21 years old. But a few years after the beginning, Peter I offered peace to the Swedes. He said that we don't really need anything, we have access to the Baltic Sea, St. Petersburg, and a little bit around the security zone, and that's it. Historically, these are Russian lands because the entire Leningrad region, most of Karelia, are all lands that were once subject to the Novgorod Republic. And they were covered piece by Sweden. In the time of Ivan the Terrible, piecemeal, we know that these are all our ancestral lands. But we don't even ask for them. Give us a little. Give us freedom and access to the sea. Russia has no access to the sea, it cannot live without it. Give us St. Petersburg and the surrounding area. And we will end the war. Security guarantee. It sounds very modern. What do the Swedes say? No, we will fight to the last Swede. This means that Charles XII continues the mad war, despite Peter's repeated offers of peace. But the funny thing is that Charles XII, who would you think supported? England and France. They provide endless funding to Sweden. Infinite. In the end, we agree on peace talks. This means that in 1718 the Åland trial begins. In the Åland, the direct peace talks between Russia and Sweden have been going on for a long time. England and France stand point blank. No negotiations. Stop. Let's better do it through intermediaries, through us, because it is beneficial for them when two major powers fight. In the end, these peace talks came to nothing, and only in 1721, 21 years after the outbreak of war, Sweden still signed, a peace agreement out of state. Only it was not St. Petersburg and its environs, but it was a significant part of Karelia, the Leningrad region, the Baltic states, and, of course, St. Petersburg. And the most important thing is that Sweden has forever lost the status of a great European power.
Russians have this peculiarity. They live well in the past and dream of good future. But in the present, they have dot devastation and a Tsar who promise them that life will get better. Donald Trump made another simply unrealistic statement in an interview with Fox News. Trump noted that if Putin's tanks hadn't gotten stuck in the mud, they would have been in Kiev in 5 hours. It has been 4 years since the full-scale invasion, and I'm really sorry that we still have to listen to such statements from world leaders. These are statements that not only have nothing to do with reality, but they also devalue the efforts that our country has made to stop the Russian invasion.
He wants to look good. Don't forget, this was supposed to end in 1 week. And if he didn't get stuck in the mud with his army tanks all over the place, they would have been in Kiev in about 5 hours. And who gave the javelins? Do you remember who gave the javelins? Was it Barack Hussein Obama? No, it was Donald Trump gave the javelins. Do you think...
The Financial Times writes that Putin took a big risk with his actions. At the same time, Trump didn't dare to speak out against the Russian dictator, but on the contrary, supported him in his rhetoric. Trump didn't criticize Putin even after European leaders, together with Zelensky, called him and clearly clarified the situation with Putin. European leaders expressed their disappointment. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, French President Emmanuel Macron, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz and Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk eventually issued a joint statement in which they said that Putin's position was unacceptable. The 4 leaders, together with Zelensky, also had a joint telephone conversation with Trump. Starmer said that there is currently a high level of coordination between the main 4 countries, Great Britain, France, Germany and Poland, and the administration of US President Trump on Ukraine. It's just caused tears, said one European foreign minister, referring to the Trump's administration's message to Europe in the hope that the president will eventually change his stance on Russia. So far, this European rhetoric hasn't been supported by anyone in the Trump administration, which has continued to express the disappointment with both sides of the conflict without signing out Russia, and has hinted that it might leave. The Financial Times wrote about this. Meanwhile, the president of the European Commission noted that she is ready to put pressure on Putin until the Russian dictator is ready to make peace. She started this the day before during a conversation with journalists. She emphasized that European countries are preparing the 18th package of sanctions against the Russian dictator.
We want peace, and therefore we have to increase the pressure on President Putin till he is ready for peace. And this is why we're working on a new package of sanctions. This package will include sanctions on Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, listing more vessels of the Russian shadow fleet and also lowering the oil price cap. It will include more sanctions on the financial sector in Russia.
We are very grateful to our European partners for their support. It is extremely important that the USA joins the sanctions that the Europeans have already announced. Thank you for watching this video. Give it a like and leave your comment. Take care, and we will meet for the next news soon.